Cool. Hello, everyone. Thank you again for registering and joining us on the spot. We've got an interesting session on today. We have my colleague, Alex Leemon. Thanks for joining us again. G'day. And we want to also welcome joining us today on the spot, Rob Murray-Leach, who heads up the policy space at Energy Efficiency Council. Hey, Rob, how are you?
Good morning, Nathaniel. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm a little bit disappointed that you didn't go with the black checkered shirt, but I thought that's okay. We can, you do stand out from the crowd. So
I normally wear one, but I didn't want to look too creepy by matching you, because I know that you guys always wear identical shirts every day. So
the uniform.
Uniform.
That's right. Even if we don't know it. But yes. So yeah. Thanks, guys, for joining us. We've got an interesting show for today. So Rob's joining us at a quite an interesting time where there's a fair bit of activity happening on the policy space within the energy market, and one in particular that we want to talk about is the Wholesale Demand Response Mechanism that was recently endorsed a couple of weeks ago now. So it's quite fresh off the press, and there's still a lot of activity going around. What does it actually mean for the industry and for the market? So yeah, we're really keen to talk today with Rob around some of the insights that he sees, not only from his perspective, but from the wider Energy Efficiency Council's perspective on how the Wholesale Demand Response Mechanism will play out. But maybe just to kick things off, Rob, did you want to just give us a quick introduction behind who you are and EEC?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Rob Murray-Leach. I've been working in the policy space in energy and a range of other forms of efficiency actually for about 20 years now. So background from Oxford in behavioural sciences and human sciences, and then did my master's in policy at Adelaide, and been working, founded the Energy Efficiency Council in 2010. And then sort of stepped down as the CEO about 4 or 5 years ago, because I decided the policy stuff's way more interesting than managing people. Quite lazy, so I let somebody else do that. The Energy Efficiency Council is just a peak body for energy efficiency in Australia. So it brings together all the experts, so companies like Flow Power and a range of governments, academic institutions like CSIRO, and universities around the country. Local governments. So it's really the peak body for people who care about energy efficiency. Our mission is basically expanding the amount of energy efficiency in Australia, because if we look at a global level, Australia has been ranked, I think, I have to double check this, I think it was about 23rd out of the, no, it was 19th, sorry, 19th out of 25 largest energy users in the world for energy efficiency policy and practice, and actually we were the worst ranked out of all the developed countries. So the ones behind us were sort of Saudi Arabia and a couple of other smaller developing countries. So we've got a long way to go, but there's huge benefits from unlocking that potential.
Yeah, absolutely, and I'll just say we've been working quite closely with Energy Efficiency Council, not just as Flow Power, but personally, I've been quite impressed with what Energy Efficiency Council has been able to do the last 10 or so years. Has it been in operation, Rob? Yeah, and I guess the way I see it, or the way I've perceived it, is really the peak body behind energy users in particular, in really sharing that knowledge and sharing industry and market knowledge around what energy users can do around energy efficiency, energy management, etc. And as a service provider to, particularly to the market side of energy users, yeah, it's definitely, there's a whole wealth of information and skills and industry and political knowledge that the Energy Efficiency Council can share for energy users if that's of interest out there. But yes, Rob, it's really great to have you on board, and yeah, great to talk about a lot of the things that's happening at the moment. Alex, so again, I think this is now your fourth time on the spot. So this is also quite relevant in Alex's world, leading our demand response space here at Flow Power. So Alex, can you tell us a little bit about your views, I suppose, on what's happening, particularly with the Wholesale Demand Response Mechanism, maybe just from a high level perspective for the moment before we get stuck into the detail?
Thanks, Nat. Great to be back. Yeah, this is a long time coming, really. This is sort of the work that has been going on since at least 2012 in its early incarnation, and it's sort of finally here after, I think we'd argue the can has been kicked down the road for a long time. So it's fantastic to see that the way we see, or certainly the way I see the wholesale demand response mechanism is, it's a really a more public acknowledgement of the role that demand side resources can play in the grid moving forward. So it's really fantastic to see. So we certainly have a view as Flow Power that our customers have been doing demand response for many years, and there are plenty of other players in the market doing demand response, but this is sort of really the rule change to open up demand response to a more public, to a wider range of customers, and make it a more of a household name, I think.
Yeah, and I think, and we'll get into the detail about that, but that probably is the exciting part as to how the wider market will really embrace demand response, particularly given that for a lot of them it's quite new. They have never really had access or never thought they could have access to the energy market, and with the wholesale demand response mechanism, technically they could be direct participants in what's happening with the market, and if there's enough of them, that could have a reasonable impact on how the market operates. Well, that's the goal anyway. So I guess just before we kick things off then in more detail, Rob, can you give us a little bit of just a general landscape around what you're seeing and what the EEC are currently involved in with the political landscape, not only around the demand response mechanism, but also just what's happening across the market?
Yeah, so I guess coming to the point you made earlier, and I really appreciate you saying we've had an impact. I think the main thing that the council does is the council's literally it's the council of its members, right? So what we've done, I think, really successfully in the last 10 years is bring the expertise of organizations like Flow and other players in the energy efficiency space, and package that information up in a way that's useful for other people. So there's a lot of people for whom energy efficiency is something that they're really, really interested in, but it's a tiny, tiny part of their job, or energy management. It's a tiny part of their job. So we work really closely with a range of associations that see this as quite important for their members. So that's manufacturing groups or property groups. We've worked really closely with them to provide them with a lot of the information and support they need to advocate for something that's, it's one of their top 10 priorities, but it's never been, the top one that they go and advocate for. And so I think what really happened is that narrative and that understanding of energy management has deepened and grown so much in the past 10 years. So right now, I mean, obvious point to everyone who's on the call, with COVID, Australia really desperately needs to look at how it's going to reignite its economy. And we actually put, I think, probably one of the first, certainly it was private and public, hands out there to ministers probably the first weekend after this hit, which was, you're going to basically need to put the economy into hibernation, and then at some point you're going to need it to come out the other side of charging, and you're going to put some stimulus behind that. The thing I'm probably most worried about at the moment is that some governments might take the approach of a sort of an austerity-based approach toward the recession. I've got family, I grew up in the UK, and I've got family and friends over there, and I have to say the one thing we've learned from the GFC is that Australia's approach was extraordinary and very effective, and the austerity-based approach to COVID is going to be a very, very bad idea. So there's very broad consensus that we need to put in stimulus. What's amazing is that the number one consensus amongst people at the moment is energy efficiency. So whether you're talking the Property Council, the Australian Industry Group, Business Council of Australia, Australian Council of Social Service, which represents all the sort of welfare groups, a lot of the housing bodies, they've all basically said energy management is the way out of this. And the reason for that is it's so job intensive. So the International Energy Agency has just come out and said the way out of the current situation is energy efficiency absolutely has to be a central plank of that. So if you kind of look at, what are the key messages? People want governments to invest in public housing, developing our local manufacturing base to give us a bit more independence from global supply chains, and energy management. Those are the top three. And there's some very good reasons for that. As I said, energy efficiency is very job intensive. The International Energy Agency has just come out with a report where they're basically saying we should focus on energy efficiency and clean energy, and that will create about 9 million jobs a year and boost global GDP 1% a year. So that's the real focus. And what we've seen is that, as I said, we work with a range of these groups. It's almost near unanimous at the moment that government should be focusing on this. Whether governments do or not, it's unclear. They've started to put out some quite modest packages around this, but politics is complicated, and we're not sure where that'll go. So that's the sort of stimulus side. The second side that I think is really important at the moment is the energy reform side. Really, the demand side mechanism that's just been had its final determination out from the Energy Market Commission is really just one of a whole range of reforms. So in fact, there's reforms that started a few years ago. So being able to sell demand response as a frequency control measure was introduced 2017. Is that right, Nathaniel and Alex?
Yeah.
Now represents about 15% of the FCAS market. And at the same time, when it was introduced, it resulted in a really dramatic reduction in the price for frequency control services, because it provides another form of competition in a competitive market that has very significant price impacts. But we've also had network reforms. We've got the DR mechanism underway now. There's a debate around moving towards a two-sided market after 2025, which is a very complicated reform. And I think there'll be further pressure on using demand management more broadly to integrate more renewables into the grid, because basically the more variation you get in your supply, the more you need to be able to match your demand to that pattern, because that improves energy security and it dramatically reduces energy costs. So that's the big picture for me at the moment. Is you've got the stimulus picture and you've got this energy reform picture. They're very, very connected, but there's certainly a lot going on in the space right now.
Yeah, and like being in the market myself, I'm still struggling to stay up to speed with all the different changes that are happening. And so for the energy user, I guess if we were to look at these changes taking place, I suppose, what do you think it would mean for them, and what if we look at the next few months of the wholesale demand response mechanism taking place, or at least the industry and the market preparing itself for it? Where do you see the next few months, the next 12 months heading?
So I think a lot of that's going to depend on government programs. So if the government does come out with a big stimulus package based around energy management, that could be a very substantial turbocharge, because I think about energy management, yes, it's energy efficiency, but it's also shaping your load on a sort of, and I think of energy management in three bundles. You've got kind of almost energy efficiency, which is just consuming less energy through more efficient processes. It's, putting in efficient lighting in your place, in your workplace, that'll cut your energy from lighting bill by 95%.
Almost like a volume reduction.
Yeah, exactly. I think of load shaping, which is permanently shifting when you use energy. So it's now with more and more PV in the middle of the day, it's moving your demand to the middle of the day, reducing your demand in the sort of 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. period on a permanent basis. And then I think of demand response as that sort of very quickly changing when you're using energy in response to the conditions in the energy market. So it might be, it's a very hot day. It might be that, an interconnector's gone down between two states and suddenly the energy prices rocketed up. You can think of it in a bunch of different ways. That's the way I kind of think of it. I think governments are going to could go pretty heavily in this space. And if they do it, it'll really support energy users to get across all. I mean, one of the most obvious things to me, for example, is, so few large energy users actually have sub-metering at the moment. Building an awareness and installing that equipment, it doesn't just deliver benefits in those spaces, it also enables people to actually really understand what's going on in their plant, full stop, not just energy-wise, but what's going on with materials, what's going on with maintenance. So I think there's a big shift in productivity coming, but with the economic conditions being the way they are now, governments will really need to provide some support and assistance to manufacturing in particular to take up those opportunities, but also in the commercial space. So one question is, it will depend on. The second thing is the demand response mechanism. People will not have to do anything. Like large energy users aren't going to have to do. They're already doing no demand response. They don't have to do anything. If they're already doing lots of demand response, again, and we'll talk about this in a bit more detail in a minute. they probably shouldn't do anything. Like if you're already doing demand response with wholesale exposure, you're going to have a very, very good price signal. What I think it will do is, and it's not coming in until October 2021, I see it as a way for people to be able to try demand response who've never done it before. So if you're sort of thinking about demand response at the moment, the best option isn't always will be going to wholesale spot exposure, because you have such a precise price signal that then enables you to maximize the benefits from changing when you use energy. Whereas the demand response mechanism will give you a signal when prices are very, very high, and you won't get the full price benefits because the base, but it will definitely be a big benefit compared to right now if you're on a flat tariff and you have no incentives from your current retailer.
Yeah.
So what I think it will enable people to do is, one is they'll start thinking about it, they'll hear about this and be like, oh, what's this? And so the awareness of demand response will go up. The second thing is, I think it gives people a really easy way to start trying demand response. So the way I think about it is, I don't know, Nathaniel or Alex, do either of you listen to jazz at all?
Not often.
Not my choice.
But exactly, right? So there's some really avant-garde jazz out there. Like if you listen to jazz, what happens is you start with Miles Davis, right? It's really easy.
Yes.
It's kind of nice background music. And people will be very insulted by me saying that, but it's true, right? And very easy to get into, right? If you listen to jazz for a while, suddenly that's not enough for you. It's kind of like a drug fix. It's not wild enough. It's not crazy enough. It's very straight. And you start listening to more and more weird, sort of atonal, very complex jazz, which to somebody who's never listened to jazz before sounds horrific. And the more you listen to jazz, the more weird stuff you like. And if you take a break from listening to jazz, like I didn't listen to it for about 10 years, and you started to come back in, and the weird stuff was like, oh my God, what is this? This is horrific, right? So in other words, this is like the gateway drug to jazz. Like he's very easy to get into. And that's kind of how I think of the wholesale mechanism. If you're already doing demand response on a wholesale exposure, it's going to be a bit mainstream for you. You're getting a much better incentive already. But for people who've never tried, it's a really easy, accessible way to try demand response. Find out actually this stuff's pretty good, and then in 3 years' time they'll be listening to John Coltrane's sessions from when he was really drunk late at night.
We should incorporate a few more jazz sessions at Flow Power just to follow that theme. Look, I'm with you.
Suggestion, so maybe don't.
Look, it's I think what you're referring to there, and you and I have spoken about this previously, where we could see a cultural shift around people's perceptions and understanding about demand response, and as their level of understanding starts to mature, the goal there is that they'll even consider that as a core component of their energy management plan, as to what they can physically do across their sites. And from FlowPower's perspective, that's huge. That's huge, because even with the customers that we do have who have an element, either a small portion or fully exposed to spot, there is still a level of education that it needs to come with that, because at the moment demand response isn't that understood, or that well understood across the industry. So we do think there's going to be some positive outcomes that come through the release of the wholesale demand response mechanism. But yeah, in terms of that wide adoption, as well as how the service providers and the demand response aggregators, how they present the mechanism to the market, that's probably going to be interesting as well.
Yeah, like, and I think that's the thing about demand response is the first time you come across it, it's an incredibly complicated concept. I mean, wholesale prices are quite complicated. A lot of people historically had very low wholesale prices. It was just not something you really looked at that much in Australia compared to Europe and the US, where it's been mainstream for a long time. And the way I think of it, it's like, you get your iPhone, and the first time you got an iPhone, you're like, what the hell is going on? And you're trying to work it all out. And there's a really high learning cost in those first few days. But actually, when you kind of get it, it becomes automatic and you don't even think about it anymore. And I think that's where we're going with the energy market. Is energy market's changing really fast. There's a painful period of learning. It's like when you first learn a foreign language, the first few days are really, really hard as you start to learn this stuff. But once you kind of get the basics, you don't worry about it too much anymore. And to a certain extent, my view is once people get the basics, it's actually not something for them to worry about at all. Like it's, you start to understand that demand response is something you can do, and then it's over to help you implement that. And it's almost basically automated, so you don't think about it. So in a weird way, I think we're in this world that if you kind of, this is the old world, no demand response. People didn't have to think about it at all because they didn't. The new world is going to be demand response. People won't think about it at all because it'll be automated. In between that, there's this period of having to spend some time and energy to learn the basics in order to get you to that point where you, again, don't have to worry about it, if that makes sense. So it's not going towards a new complicated world. It's just that the world is changing. In between those phases, there's a bit of learning. And we're right at that period right now. And I think it can seem scary, but it's actually, it's pretty basic stuff.
Yeah. No, I'm totally with you. I guess, Alex, as Flow Power is a service provider for demand response, and with our assessment of where we see the wholesale DR mechanism going in the future, I suppose, can you share maybe some of your insights as to what might be some of the trends or the risks that some, maybe service providers or energy users who are interested in participating in wholesale DR, what could be some of the risks associated with the current model?
Yeah, absolutely. So, like, I think as we've discussed, it's a great change in the market, and I personally think it's going to encourage more aggregators or service providers to enter into the market, particularly some international companies who may have been watching the Australian market and making decisions as to whether they should enter or not. And I think on the whole, it's going to benefit customers significantly. What is going to be most interesting is to see how those contractors or how those contracts from different service providers are offered to customers. So from an implementation side, I think there's a fair bit of risk in doing some of the demand response if players are not experienced to the way the rule is written with the concept of the scheduled loads, and being aware of, as Rob talked about, the complexities in the wholesale price can be quite can be challenging for those not used to dealing with it. So there's a little bit of risk for service providers there. I think from the customer side, you would be expecting a contract from a service provider that insulates you from a lot of that risk. That risk should be on the energy professionals, and as a sort of a customer providing that demand response, you should be receiving the benefit of that, and not having to take on huge amounts of risk. So it will be really interesting to see the kind of contractual arrangements that service providers come in, the offerings, how they're saying that their expertise in the market is, and what they can pay you for your ability to reduce load. Because obviously, if you've ever looked at the wholesale prices and seen, where they might average around $100 or $200 in a sort of early afternoon peak, and then they can go up to $15,000, there's a lot of value there. So that value should be priced appropriately for customers, we hope.
Yes, coming back actually to that point I was saying earlier about, it was really simple to do demand management. We just didn't. And it'll be really simple for people in the future. The reason I think it's going to be simple for people in the future is the role of companies like Flow Power and other experts. So there's a concept, I think, in energy markets we really need to learn from, again, using iPhones as an idea, that idea of simplicity, which is there's a lot of complexity, but someone who's a good service provider makes it really simple. So as an energy user, you don't worry about it. You're not having to thinking about it because the provider's there. That's the other thing I think that's good about the demand response mechanism, is it makes it quite explicit that really to get the value out of demand response aggregation, we need experts in the middle to, unless you're the very, very largest energy user, you're going to need experts in the middle to take up this benefit together, package up to the market in a way that you're not even going to notice often, but it's going to add, seriously big savings at the end of the year. And Nathaniel, maybe if I could ask you a question, which I probably shouldn't do since I'm being interviewed, but are you able, or Alex, what sort of for some of you, what sort of scale of savings are people getting currently from doing demand response? Noting that a lot of people, I think, still have that little toe in the water, like they can actually get a lot more benefits, even people who are doing demand response. What sort of savings of your customers in terms of annual?
Sure. For wholesale customers, if they were to successfully facilitate a demand response event for those handful of times per year, and we're talking anywhere from 5 to maybe 10 hours maximum across the whole year, it could translate to anywhere between a 5 to 15% saving over the total annual bill. Alex, is that roughly about right? 15% would be the upper limit?
Yeah, that's about right. We'd say 7 to 10% is quite a common savings that we see amongst customers who can respond to all of the instructions that we provide, like when to do demand response.
And I think that's the interesting thing for me again is the value stack. So that's your wholesale component. Then you have those other components which we're starting with. Like, this is one of the big reforms we really need to make, is ensure that energy users get paid when they benefit the network through doing demand response. So you can do a little bit of that at the moment because it's kind of covered-ish in your sort of in the energy price you get from your network, but not really. There are certain locations in the grid where an energy user can deliver literally millions and millions of dollars of benefits by doing demand response at the right time in the right part of the grid. So I think that would presumably, Alex, be on top of that estimate of about 15%.
Yep, that would go above and beyond that.
Yeah, and the value stack does get a lot wider as well when we start talking about like what you were referring to before with demand management and being able to shift load around using similar concepts from demand response, but on a more dynamic basis. And then when you look at some of the network utility demand response programs out there, again, these are all things that center around DR, but either generate additional revenue to the customer or potentially avoid significant costs. So I suppose the good thing here is with the wholesale DR mechanism, it does get more people involved and engaged in demand response, even if they are on fixed peak off-peak contracts. And that's the part that's quite interesting to us because at the moment we've only really been able to engage with customers around demand response when they're a wholesale customer. And the way we facilitate that training, the way we take them through that process, it is centered around their retail position. And so now that there's a fixed price position out there where the wider market can still benefit from DR, it just opens up the world a little bit and will definitely provide some new opportunities for the wider market and provide a bigger opportunity for them to engage and learn about all of these other programs too.
And it's probably good to mention that actually, Nathaniel, because we've got about 55, we've got quite a lot of people online. Just because not everyone will be as familiar with this as us. So currently the only way you can get rewarded for demand response, there's only 2 ways. So one, if you're a retailer, let's say you're with Joe Blogg's Energy and they're giving you a fixed price contract, it's 20 cents per unit of energy or whatever it is. Obviously, it would not be that if you're a large user. And then it doesn't matter when you use it. And there are these times when the energy price to that retailer could be really high. It could go to 15,000. They might want to offer some energy users an incentive to reduce demand during those periods of time. The second way you could do it is if you're a retailer that gives you spot exposure, in which case, and I do think that's the gold standard because the price that you'll be paying goes from minus $1,000 per megawatt to $15,000 per megawatt, and adjusting your energy price can give you a very precise and very substantial reward depending on what kind of energy user you are. So what this is going to do is it gives people a third option, and it's not as good as wholesale price exposure, but it's a very good option because what it's basically saying is, let's say you've got your retail contract at 15 cents per megawatt. 15 cents per unit of energy with your retailer, but you can go to Flow or you can go to another third party who can help you when you reduce your demand, sell that reduction in demand into the wholesale market as if it's generation. So it's basically the way. That's why I say it's sort of try before you buy. You don't have to change retail plans. You don't have to change retailer, but you can still go and engage somebody. It could be your current retailer. Could be a completely different company to reduce your demand and get paid for that. And it could be that you could say, look, I'm only going to be willing to reduce demand 3 times a year. cool, that's fine. And then the retailer or the aggregator takes on the risk and the complexity of that. And all you have to do is deliver on your stated contract and get paid.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So I think that will be a great learning process for the energy market, but I think it will also be a great learning process for the service providers too, because signing those contracts and being contractually responsible to bid that load, there's a lot of responsibility with that, and like what Alex was referring to, there is some complexity around the demand side now, essentially taking on the same rules as how generators have been operating on the NEM for the last so many decades. And so yeah, we're quite intrigued as to how this is going to work out. But I think overall, like you're saying, it'll be a cultural change. It'll be a steep learning process. But fortunately, we've got 15 months or so to start figuring it out.
Yeah. So it looks like there's quite a lot of questions as well that have come through. Nathaniel, did you want to carry on with us chatting or move on to the question?
Yeah, let's jump onto that. So okay. All right, thanks, Chris, for the point around my typing. I'll be aware of that next time. Okay, and thanks, Ben, for putting on your checkered shirt. Next time, can you let Rob know in the meantime? Okay, we've got a question from Chris. So is it always custom, or is there standardization happening in the technology used to carry out a demand response mechanism? So I might pass it on to Rob first. Have you heard any standards or any protocols that's currently being raised around the wholesale DR mechanism that could form part?
I guess there's a number of things. So the first thing with the wholesale demand mechanism is that there will have to be some level of standardization and baselining. So that's how, if you let's say you're using 10 megawatt hours all the time, and then you sort of drop your demand by 5 megawatt hours during a peak period, they need to be able to work out how to calculate what your baseline was. Now, most people aren't using a baseline that. Most baselines go up and down. So there's some complexity around that will require standardization. There's no requirement around standardization of technology for that at all at the moment. There will be standardization around the protocols that are used for that. The one thing that is becoming more standard, I would say, in terms of this is nothing to do with the demand response mechanism itself, but the more broad issue of demand response. And that's about load control for small customers. So we're starting to move towards what are the standard protocols that if you're getting an HVAC system, it's what we call a DRED, a demand response enabled device. And so protocols about how, for example, a network or another party could control that equipment. And that's about the fact that it can cost 10 cents, 20 cents to put in a DRED appropriate into an air conditioner. But if every single air conditioner's got a different device with different language, then you've got problems. So there's a lot of work going on right now about what that looks like, but that won't apply to large energy users. And it's not exclusive to the demand response mechanism. In fact, it's going to be much more related to network-based demand response.
Yeah, and I think you're right. Technology naturally has gone a long way, particularly the integration of different platforms, different proprietary systems, whether they work on, whether different SCADA systems work off Modbus or BACnet or whatever those proprietary platforms could be. There is more commonality between the level of integration of these systems to be able to communicate with each other. However, as of today, I'm not aware of any technology protocol or platform that facilitates demand response. And I think we're probably, like you say, we're probably still a few years away from that technology being widely adopted across the industry today, because there's probably no one yet that's leading the mark as of yet. But there's a number of research activities that's currently taking place, whether it be at university tertiary level or specific research departments, CSIRO, for example. But yeah, it's still quite early days from my perspective.
And there's definitely technology out there, and we developed that particularly in the commercial building space. We're seeing a lot of really great optimization software starting to emerge, but but nothing that's standardized or required at this stage. And I don't know if you'll get standardization in the commercial and industrial space, but as I said, in the residential space, 100%, yeah, there will have standardization.
Yep. Alex, I might pass this one to you. So this may be off topic for today, but is the peak supply really costing someone $15,000 per megawatt hour, or is this just market manipulation / exploitation? Can demand response totally eliminate these peak prices beyond the true cost of supply?
Solid question, and I think very on topic. So I think just a very quick summary for those who are not aware, the wholesale market price varies every half hour. People buying energy directly from the market, that is either generators providing or retailers buying it, are paying these spot prices, and then they're offering contracts that try to smooth out those prices in some form or another. So that means if you're a generator, you're trying to figure out how to run your generation plant for an entire year, or in many, we're talking decades, based on these fluctuating prices. So there is a cap. It is about to go to $15,000 per megawatt hour as of the 1st of July. And during periods of supply scarcity, so in summer, we see the price jump to this $15,000, and people often, see it as, is it manipulation? It's generators driving the price. But I think it's important to recognize that we're an energy-only market, so you are only paid for the electricity that you use, and conversely, you're only paid for the generation that you produce. So if you're a peaking station, like a gas plant, you're essentially relying on getting paid at that $15,000 per megawatt hour for 10 odd hours a year, and typically in summer, and that has to cover all of your operational costs, your staffing costs, as well as your fuel costs, and it also has to cover your capital costs to try to earn back how much it costs to build the plant in the first place, which is millions of dollars. So the real cost of operating a gas plant is somewhere in the order of $200 to $300 per megawatt hour, but there's a lot of other costs built into that, that assumption around that. So will demand response totally eliminate these peak prices? The answer is no, because we'll still see supply scarcity in the market, particularly on very, very hot days in summer, when, particularly when you've got, above 30, 35 plus degree days. But there's a big opportunity for demand response to help reduce the severity or the length of those peaks. And in some cases, demand response will be actively competing against peaking generation. So, for example, if people decide not to build new peaking plants because there is demand response capacity in the system to do the same thing, then you'll see a shift in those prices, and we might see peaking prices of $10,000 instead of 15. So it will change the nature of those peaks. So yeah, demand response absolutely can change that.
If I can add into that, there's this. I'll sketch in the air graph, but if you think about the merit order, so basically the way it works is, something on the left-hand side is on all the time, and something here is only on for like 1% of the year, and you sort of see the price basically stay pretty low, and then as it hits here, it goes exponential. Now, as Alex said, there's actually very good reasons for doing that. The plant that's only operating 1% of the year, you still need to provide an incentive for somebody to build that and operate that plant and keep it running, because it's, even if it's already built, mothballing it's a lot cheaper than keeping it active the whole time, or active to be deployed. But so what will happen with demand response is, if you can almost imagine, you get an extra lump of potential supply in here, which means that theoretically it still go to $15,000, but it might happen half as often, because before you get there, there's a bunch of cheaper stuff. What I would say is that does two things which are quite important. So the first thing, and this was said by Oakley Greenwood a few years ago, was what that will mainly do is because they can now say, well, we don't just have to accept it when it goes to $15,000, which before, particularly if they're paying a fat price, would just be passed on to them through the rest of the year. They can now say, actually, I'm not prepared to pay at that level. I won't consume energy when it goes over $10,000. And so what that means is, for that peaking generation, they're going, okay, well, I can now only sell at this point, right? So they can only sell for $10,000 until it hits the point that all the people who are prepared to only consume $10,000 will come in, and then they sort of switch off. So one is, it means that you've got a much more power for consumers in terms of setting that price. But the other thing, and this is, I guess, coming to the question, is, does the fact that prices go to $15,000 mean the market's being exploited? No, that's a natural feature of the market. Is there market manipulation and exploitation going on? And Alex then loses himself laughing at that point, because that's a very, very hot debate. It's very hard to prove. I think some people have argued quite persuasively that there have definitely been times when people have exploited their market position to be able to exploit consumers. And so what's quite nice is that this mechanism provides a safety valve that we're probably going to get less ripped off. I mean, as an example, there have been a few periods of time in South Australia when the interconnect has gone down, when price behavior has looked like there might be market manipulation going on. I couldn't possibly comment, and I wouldn't want to be sued by saying that.
Yeah. So maybe we'll jump on to the next question now. but yes, I think I agree with all of the above comments. And naturally, during those $15,000 per megawatt hour peaks, there may be a shift towards peaking capacity through to demand participation, and how that dynamic changes the market in the future. Yeah, we'll see. But yeah, there's definitely a potential for that happening. Okay, so Andrew has written, there are huge opportunities here in the Ergon region for demand response. If you can get peak demand or offset large demand billing with demand response earnings, it makes the contestable market far more attractive in the region. Thank you for that statement. There's no question on the end of that, but thank you, Andrew, for that. With demand response contracts,
can you do RERT activation in the Ergon region? I saw one, and the answer is yes. You can definitely do that. The RERT activation is nothing to do with your network; it's to do with AEMO, so you can contract directly with AEMO.
Yeah, and then, but they haven't called it a number of years now, have they?
What's that?
Sorry, they haven't called RERT in Queensland for a number of years now, have they?
Never.
They haven't.
Queensland has the most oversupply of all of the regions. So from a reliability perspective, Queensland is arguably in the best shape.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll jump on to Chris. So with demand reduction contracts, does the retailer turn down your consumption when needed, or signal the customer when to turn down themselves? Interesting question. Alex, can I get you to address that one, please?
Yeah, the answer is both, or can be both. So, for example, if we were to talk about the current, spot exposure programs that we run here at Flow Power, a vast majority of our customers are what we call manual response, where we provide a signal and then they take control of whatever it is they're going to switch off on their site. So it gives them the option of whether they actually do want to switch off. There may be other reasons why they don't want to choose to turn off. For example, a production deadline that may override sort of the cost of using electricity. But in a number of cases, we also have a technology, we call it the K-Watch controller, where we can switch off the customers when we send the signal, so that they don't have to basically do anything. They just approve a message saying that, yes, we agree, and then we'll take control of the pre-agreed devices on their site. So all of that's been agreed up front. And it gives us the power, gives them the power to basically avoid having to take those actions. So yes, both can be done. Yep.
And from what I've seen across the market is it really varies depending on what the energy user wants. So exactly what Alex said, and I like to think in terms of examples because my brain can only work that way. But let's say you've got a cold store and you talk to your retailer, let's say Flow, and say, as long as the temperature stays below this, you can just control it, whatever you want, give me the best price. I don't want to have to think about it. I'm too busy filling in my warehouse and doing my things in here. I don't want to have to touch anything or think about it. But as long as you keep this temperature requirements and you keep this, you lower the price as much as you can and you deliver me savings, please. On the other side, there might be somebody who would have, say, and the reason I give that example is that something like a cold store, the end user doesn't need to know what's going on in that, as long as it's keeping a really basic criteria. There'll be other things such as, let's say there's an emergency situation, like two generators have gone down in a state. You can get paid an absolute mozza if you reduce your demand during those periods. But in order to do that, you might have to do something like switch off a gravel crushing machine, which means you're going to forfeit half a day's worth of production. You need to make that choice. It's a complex choice that only you can make. And so it's a horses for courses situation. But the way I'd say it is, don't worry, it's not about somebody taking control of your stuff, and it's not about you having to run around switching off stuff that you don't care. It's about finding the package that fits the energy user best. Would that be a fair way of putting it, Alex? And
That's an excellent way of putting it.
Absolutely, absolutely, and part of that, just to expand on that is the primary reason why we developed a demand response framework, because not all loads and not all business operations are suited for demand response, and it's really about making sure that we have a framework in place that we can follow, but also the customer can understand how their business best suits this opportunity. So yeah, it's a good point there, because it can get a bit tricky when we start to talk about complex systems participating in DR. But on the flip side, it's actually quite straightforward if you follow a basic framework.
The other thing I might
I'll go on.
implicit question in that as well, which is, do you have to respond as an energy user if you get asked to? And the answer is it depends to a certain extent on your contract, but generally my experience is, unless you're a very large energy user and you're dealing directly with the energy market yourself, the answer is no, because you'll normally go through an aggregator or a retailer like Flow. And so we can give 2 examples. Let's say you're wholesale exposed and the price has gone to $15,000 a megawatt hour, and Flow gives you a call and says, hey, price has gone really high, you should switch off. Still your choice. You can keep running. You're paying really high prices. Right? That's a service that your retailer is offering to you to warn you. You can get great savings right now, but you don't have to. It's like if there's a sale at the supermarket, it doesn't mean I have to rush down there and buy 200 boxes of cereal. It's there if I want it.
Yeah.
The other thing is there might be situations where you've got a contractual responsibility to do that, but often that's actually put on the retailer or the aggregator, not on the energy user. So we see a lot of situations where the aggregator or the retailer will basically say, yeah, we'll provide this capacity to the market, and they're doing that off over 50 customers. So if 1 or 2 of those customers don't respond, it doesn't matter. They've thought about that and they've bundled that together.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll do one more question from Kadem. So Rob, this one might be for you. Is there a place for government, state or federal, to encourage participation in the DRM as part of the recovery plan?
Yes.
Great.
Absolutely. There's some really great data that we're just starting to see. I'm just trying to remember the figure that I saw recently, which was mind-blowing, from the IEA, and they were saying globally there's currently 47 gigawatts of demand response, they estimate. And they reckon that smart controls and a range of technology innovations and market reforms could increase that to 470. So and I think that's pretty conservative. So we've got this huge potential there. Any one mechanism on its own is not going to do that, because it is a case of getting energy users comfortable. It's sometimes a case of maybe providing a few sweeteners out there for people to try it, start to realize it's not too bad, and then once you've done that, then you'll start to see the market change. I think, as we were discussing recently, Nathaniel, I think what's really exciting to me is seeing how in other markets around the world, like in the US, it's like a standard thing. Like if you're a commercial or industrial company, and you go to your retailer, one of the first things you ask is, what do I get paid with you if I do demand response? How can you help me unlock this potential? What's the deal? And that's not just a standard thing. So I think we've got this journey to get to that being a standard thing in Australia. And I think government has a big role to play in making that happen.
Okay, thank you very much, Rob. This has been a great session. I really enjoyed talking about policy and the wholesale DR mechanism. I think there's a lot of exciting things and a lot of changes expected over the coming 14, 15 months as the industry and the market starts to gear up for it. Rob, so thanks very much for joining us today, and you too, Alex, for another time. Just a message out to our audience. This will be the last session for now, for at least the next 3-4 weeks. We will be coming back, and we'll send out a couple of emails just to give everyone an update on what the plan is for On the Spot. But I guess I just want to thank everyone here really for the last 12 weeks of activities and signing up for On the Spot webinars. It's been quite an interesting forum to facilitate on a weekly basis, and sometimes challenging to try and scramble up new content to have prepared on the spot. But it's been a really great experience. We thank you for all the great questions and the interaction and engagement, not only through the session, but also by emails. Please, the on-the-spot email will still be open. So if you still have questions, flick them through. We'd love to hear from you. And we'll touch base with you in a couple of weeks once we figure out what does the next series look like for On the Spot, but we will be back. So again, thank you, Rob and Alex. I really appreciate you guys coming on board. And to everyone out there listening in, thank you again. And we look forward to seeing you in a few weeks. All right. Cheers, guys.
Thanks very much.
All right,
Nathaniel,
cheers.
that was great. Cheers.
Thank you all.